I'm Dr. Joseph MD, Department of Sociology, University of Mumbai. This is the E-Pathshala project on religion and society, and now we are in Module 18. In Module 18, we are looking at Hinduism and the legitimation of caste hierarchy. Now, in this module, we look at caste as a social structure and its legitimization from what can be generally characterized as the Hindu social order. And at the same time, we will also be looking at the caste-like structures in other religious traditions. But at the same time, we will also have a discussion on how the entire structure of caste is legitimized from the Hindu religious texts. And this is what we are going to look at in this module. Module 18, Hinduism and the legitimization of caste hierarchy. First, we go to overview of debates and discussions with different perspectives. Hinduism has been a major area of scholarship and research for social scientists and literature, or even for thinkers and writers from different intellectual backgrounds. Let us summarize these debates for a brief understanding through the writings of David Lawrenson. He writes, there are scholars who claim that Hinduism was constructed, invented or imagined by British scholars and colonial administrators in the 19th century and did not exist in any meaningful sense before this period. Those who claim this constructionist argument are Vasudha Dalmia, Robert Frickenberg, Christopher Fuller, John Hawley, Gerald Larson, Harjot Oberoi, Brian Smith, Heinrich von Streitenkron. W.C. Smith is considered to be an important precursor of these debates. Romila Tapper and Dermot Killingly have offered somewhat similar arguments, but both display greater sensitivity to historical ambiguities and distribute the construction of distinctly modern Hinduism among British Orientalists and missionaries and indigenous nationalists and communalists. Carl Ernst writes about early Muslim references to Hindus and their religion. He joins the above scholars in claiming that the terms do not correspond to any indigenous Indian concept either of geography of religion. James Lane agrees with Smith in his Modern Epigons that Hinduism was invented in the 19th century but credits the invention to the Indian rather than the British. John Hawley in his essay titled Naming Hinduism writes, Hinduism, the word and perhaps the reality too, was born in the 19th century, a notoriously illegitimate child. The father was middle class and British, the mother of course was India. The circumstances of the conception are not altogether clear. One heard of the goodly habits and observances of Hinduism in a Bengali English grammar written in 1829, and the Reverend William Tennant had spoken of Hindu system in a book on Indian manners and history written at the beginning of the century. As it was not until the inexpensive handbook Hinduism was published by the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge in 1877 that the term came into general English usage. Harjot Oberoi, in the introduction of his work titled The Construction of Religious Boundaries, Culture, Identity and Diversity in the Sikh Tradition, writes, it is most striking that people we now call Hindus never used this term to describe themselves. The Vedas, the Ramayana, the Bhagavad Gita, which today are seen by many as religious texts of the Hindus, do not employ the word Hindu. That term was first used Achaemenid Persian to describe all those who live on or beyond the banks of the river Sindhu or Indus. Lawrenson argues that if someone refers to the word Hinduism as simple, the English word itself, then the claim that it did not exist before the 19th century is correct. Several scholars cite the date 1829 for the first known occurrence in the English in the form Hinduism. W.C. Smith, who is given credit for this, cites Oxford English Dictionary as his source. During his research through several early 19th century journals, Lawrenson managed to find one example of the word Hinduism with a U in a letter published in 1818 volume of the Asiatic Journal and Monthly Register, and no less than 7 examples also with a U in an article by John Crawford on Hinduism in Bali published in the 1820 volume of Asiatic Researches. There are 2 appearances of the term in English language text by Ram Mohan Roy, published in 1816 and 1817, that have been discussed also by Dermot Killingly in his work. In 1816, Ram Mohan Roy made this critical comment: the chief part of the theory and practice of Hinduism, I am sorry to say, is made to consist in the adoption of a peculiar mode of diet. In 1817, on the other hand, he claimed that the doctrines of the unity of God are real Hinduism, as that religion was practiced by our ancestors, as it is well known at the present day to many learned Brahmins. This contradicts the viewpoint of proponents of British construction of Hinduism to admit the fact that an Indian-born Hindu seems to have been the first to coin the key label for this supposedly British construct. The variants of the word Hindu were current in Persian and in the vernacular Indian languages long before the 19th century. If this word referred to follower of beliefs and practices drawn from the religion, which we now call Hinduism, then the constructionist argument would be refuted from the beginning. This would be the case even if no specific word or phrase equivalent to Hinduism could be identified. Lorenzen writes that the religious sense of Hindu has long coexisted and overlapped with an ethnic and geographical sense. The idea of construction or invention of Hinduism is not only coining the term Hinduism but also the claim that mainly Europeans and more specifically the Britishers who imposed a single conceptual category on a heterogeneous collection of sects, doctrines and customs that the Hindus themselves did not recognize as having anything essential in common. Therefore, according to this view, it was only after this concept of Hinduism was constructed by these Europeans that the Hindus themselves adopted the idea that they all belong to a single religious community. This argument was first developed by W.C. Smith in his book The Meaning and the End of Religion, published in 1962. Smith argued that religion must be analyzed using religious categories rather than through the medium of disciplines such as sociology, psychology, literature, or even philosophy and history. He strongly opposed any attempt by outside observers to impose their own categories and explanations on religious phenomena. With regard to Hinduism, he argues that the naming of this religion by Europeans was a mistake. There is no Hinduism either in the minds of the Hindus or in the empirical reality itself. Richard King, in his essay titled Orientalism and the Modern Myth of Hinduism, writes that the modern concept of Hinduism is not merely the product of Western Orientalism. Western Orientalism was necessary but not sufficient causal factor in the rise of this particular social construction. In this essay, Richard King quoted Talal Asad. Talal Asad writes, "Anthropologists who would study Muslim belief and practice will need some understanding that how religion has come to be formed as concept and practice in the modern West. For while religion is integral to modern Western history, there are dangers in normalizing the concept when translating Islamic traditions." Richard King argues that this statement of Talal Asad is equally applicable to the study of Asian culture in general, Hinduism and the legitimization of caste hierarchy. A very critical understanding of Hinduism and its most integral hierarchical system of caste became one of the major areas of scholarship of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's work. Dr. Ambedkar critically writes about Hinduism in his work titled Philosophy of Hinduism, where he raised the question whether Hinduism recognizes equality. The question instantaneously brings to one's mind the caste system. One of the most striking features of the caste is that it does not stand as a horizontal series, but rather different castes in Hinduism are placed in a vertical series, one above the other. He writes that Manu may not be responsible for creation of caste, but certainly preached the sanctity of caste. Therefore, Manu can be charged with being the progenitor, if not the author of the caste system. In this gradation of caste system by Manu, in Manusmriti, Brahmin is placed at the first rank, below Brahmanic Kshatriya at the next rank in the vertical series. Below Kshatriya is the Vaishya, below Vaishya is the Shudra, and below Shudra is the Ati Shudra, the untouchables. He further writes, this inequality in status is not merely the inequality that one sees in the warrant of precedence, prescribed for the ceremonial gathering at the king's court. It is a permanent social relationship among the classes to be observed, to be enforced at all times, in all places, and for all purposes. It will take too long to show how, in every phase of life, Manu has introduced and made inequality the vital force of life. Ambedkar described that how Manu has introduced and made inequality the vital force of life by writing in detail about examples from slavery, marriage, and rule of law. Caste system and slavery. Manu recognizes slavery, but he confined it to the Shudras. Only Shudras could be made slaves of the three higher classes, but the higher classes could not be the slaves of the Shudra. But evidently, practice differed from the law of Manu, and not only Shudras happened to become slaves, but members of other three classes also became slaves. When this was discovered to be the case, a new rule was enacted by the successor of Manu, namely Narada, which runs as follows. In the inverse order of the four castes, slavery is not ordained except for a man violates the duties peculiar to his caste. Slavery in that respect is analogous to the condition of a wife. Caste system and marriage. On marriage, Manu writes, For the first marriage of the twice-born classes, a woman of the same class is recommended, but for such as are impelled by inclination to marry again, women in the direct order of the classes are to be preferred. A Shudra woman only must be the wife of Shudra, she and a Vaishya of a Vaishya, they two and a Kshatriya, and of a Kshatriya, those two and a Brahmani of a Brahmin. Manu is of course opposed to intermarriage. His conjecture is for each class to marry within his class, but he does recognize marriage outside the defined classes. Here again he is particularly careful not to allow intermarriage to do harm to his principle of inequality among classes. Like slavery, he permits intermarriage but not in the inverse order. A Brahmin, when marrying outside his class, may marry any woman from any of the classes below him. A Kshatriya is free to marry a woman from the two classes next below him, namely the Vaishya and Shudra, but must not marry a woman from the Brahmin class which is above him. A Vaishya is free to marry a woman from the Shudra class which is next below him, but he cannot marry a woman from the Brahmin and the Kshatriya class which are above him. This discrimination existed because Manu was most anxious to preserve the rule of inequality which was his guiding principle, caste system and the rule of law. The other aspect about which Manu wrote was rule of law, as explained by Dr. Ambedkar in the context of rule of law in Hinduism. The punishment for a crime is inflicted on the organ concerned in the crime, such as belly, tongue, nose, eyes, ears, organs of generation, etc., as if the offending organ was a sentient being having a will for its own and had not been merely a servitor of human being. Second feature of Manu's penal code is the inhuman character of the punishment, which has no proportion to the gravity of the offence. But the most striking feature of Manu's penal code, which stands out in all its nakedness, is the inequality of punishment for the same offence. Inequality designed not merely to punish the offender, but to protect also the dignity and to maintain the baseness of the parties coming to a court of law to seek justice, in other words, to maintain the social equality on which the whole scheme is founded. It is based on these arguments he argued that how Hinduism graded inequality in society. He also argued that how Hinduism also graded religious inequality through matters which are connected with what are called sacraments and ashrams. It is through these arguments in his philosophy of Hinduism, Dr. Ambedkar criticized proponents of Hinduism and established the point that Hinduism did not stand on the principles of liberty, equality and fraternity, but on the other hand is based on the principle of graded inequality, the Hindu social order. In another important work titled The Hindu Social Order, Its Essential Principles, Dr. Ambedkar writes, the Hindu social order does not recognize the individual as a center of social purpose, for the Hindu social order is based primarily on class or varna and not on individuals. Originally and formally, the Hindu social order recognized four classes: Brahmin, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras. Today it consists of 5 classes, the fifth being called the Panchamas or untouchables. The unit of Hindu society is not the individual Brahmin or the individual Kshatriya or the individual Vaishya or the individual Shudra or the individual Panchama. Even the family is not regarded by the Hindu social order as the unit of society except for the purposes of marriage and inheritance. The unit of Hindu society is the class or varna, to use the Hindu technical name for class. In the Hindu social order, there is no room for individual merit and no consideration of individual justice. If the individual has a privilege, it is not because it is due to him personally. The privilege goes with the class, and if he is found to enjoy it, it is because he belongs to that class. Contrariwise, if an individual is suffering from a wrong, it is not because he by his conduct deserves it. The disability is the disability imposed upon the class, and if he is found to be laboring under it, it is because he belongs to that class. Does the Hindu social order recognize fraternity? In the Hindus, like Christians and the Muslims, do believe that men are created by God. But while the Christians and the Muslims accept this as whole truth, the Hindus believe that this is only part of the truth. According to them, the whole truth consists of 2 parts. The first part is that men and women are created by God. The second part is that God created different human beings from different parts of his divine body. The Hindus regard the second part as more important and more fundamental than the first. The Hindu social order is based on the doctrine that human beings are created from the different parts of the divinity, and therefore the view expressed by Paul or the Pilgrim Fathers has no place in it. The Brahmin is no brother to the Kshatriya because the former is born from the mouth of the divinity while the latter is from the arms. The Kshatriya is no brother to the Vaishya because the former is born from the arms and the latter from his thighs. As no one is a brother to the other, no one is keeper of the other. It is because of these principles of Hinduism, Dr. Ambedkar in his historic speech on 15th October 1956, after accepting Buddhism, said, "Even though I was born a Hindu in the Hindu religion, I will not die in the Hindu religion." Max Weber on Hinduism. Max Weber, in his study of India, writes about the economic development and capitalism within the context of Hinduism and its caste system. Weber writes, "During the same period at which Hinduism became systematized, trade and manufacture reached a peak in India. But the influence of Hinduism and of the emergent caste system which interlaced with it effectively inhibited any economic development comparable to modern European capitalism. A ritual law," Weber remarks, "in which every change of occupation, every change in the work of technique may result in ritual degradation, is certainly not capable of giving birth to economic and technical revolutions from within itself." Different cultural traditions of India. David Lawrenson writes about the major theoretical discussions among modern anthropologists about the relation of Indian cultural traditions to caste and class divisions reveal the existence of two general sets of conceptual concerns. According to Lawrenson, during the period from about the end of the Second World War to the mid-1960s, the theoretical concepts which attract most attention, namely those of great and little traditions stemming from Redfield and Singer, and of Sanskritization associated with Srinivas, strikingly downplay and even reject any serious attempt to distinguish the cultural values and institutions of upper and lower caste groups, much less those of classes. He writes that the culture of low caste groups is taken as being either representative of the little tradition, relatively uncontaminated by the great tradition, or else as being poorly Sanskritized by prototype of upper caste culture. This ultimately amounts to what Joan Menzer has called a view from the top down, since top down of the upper caste. Another set of conceptual scholarship, according to Lawrenson's analysis, began with anthropological studies since the 1960s. These anthropological studies include works by Pauline Collender, Owen Lynch, Elinor Zillett, Michael Moffat, Mark Huggins-Meyer, and Ravindra Khare. Most of these scholars have reflected through their work that there are significant differences between the cultural traditions of low caste Hindus compared to those of caste Hindus. Other notable scholars like Robert Miller, Jugens-Meyer, and Gail Omed have argued that there exists an alternative or parallel or counter-cultural tradition carried principally by either untouchables or the Adivasis. Jawaharlal Nehru on Hinduism. Nehru in his book Discovery of India writes about Hinduism. Jawaharlal Nehru in his book Discovery of India writes about Hinduism. Nehru argues, critiquing Smith's usage of the word Hinduism and Hinduized. He writes that it is not correct to use them in this way unless they are used in the widest sense of the Indian culture. They are apt to mislead today when they are associated with a much narrower and specifically religious concept. The word Hindu does not occur at all in our ancient literature. The first reference to it in an Indian book is, as we was told, in a tantric work of the 18th century AC, where Hindu means a people and not the followers of a particular religion. But it is clear that the word is a very old one, as it occurs in the Avesta and in the Old Persian. It was used then and for 1,000 years or more later by the peoples of the Western and Central Asia for India, or rather for the people living on the other side of the Indus River. The word is clearly derived from Sindhu, the old as well as the present Indian name for the Indus. From this Sindhu came the words Hindu and Hindustan, as well as Indus and India. He writes that the famous Chinese pilgrim Yitzing writes in his record of travels mentioned northern tribes, that is people of Central Asia as India, Hindu, but he adds that this is not at all a common name, and the most suitable name for India is the noble land, Arya Desha. The use of the word Hindu in connection with a particular religion is of a very late occurrence. He further writes that the old inclusive term for religion in India was Arya Dharma. Dharma really means something more than religion. It is from a root word which means to hold together. It is the inmost constitution of a thing, the law of the inner being. It is an ethical concept which includes the moral code, righteousness, and the whole range of human duties and responsibilities. He writes, Hinduism as a faith is vague, amorphous, many-sided, many things to all people. It is hardly possible to define it, or indeed to say definitely whether it is a religion or not, in the usual sense of the word. In its present form, and even in the past, it embraces many beliefs and practices from the highest to the lowest, often supposed to or contradicting each other. Its essential spirit seems to be to live and to let live. Mahatma Gandhi has attempted to define it. If I were asked to define Hinduism or the Hindu creed, I should simply say, search after truth through non-violent means. A human person may not believe in God and still call himself or herself a Hindu. Hinduism is relentless pursuit after truth. Hinduism is the religion of. Conclusion, Module 18. In this module, we have looked at the central concept of hierarchy and how hierarchy plays itself out in caste and how this is legitimized in the Hindu social order. Thank you.